So this Sunday we're continuing with our worship series based on that song written by Matthew West called My Own Little World, using it as a way to encourage ourselves to move beyond our own little worlds and widen our circles. And today's verse, I'm picking up on just one little phrase, "Look me in the eye." The song says, "I looked her in the eye. Oh, how many times have I just passed her by?" Look me in the eye. So our bishop has encouraged all the churches here in New England for 4 years to focus on spending some time reflecting on race and racism. We started in 2016 and will continue to work on this through 2020. And that's why, in case you may have noticed, in our newsletter, we've been putting some articles there. Sherry Nixon, our lay leader, has been writing up some wonderful things there for us to reflect on. We have all kinds of study materials provided for us. This is what they look like. If you lead a small group or if you're in a small group and want to study this, just ask us. We've got lots of copies. And there are also DVDs that come with it with some really good presentations by a variety of people that really can help us think about all this. And now, in this month, our district, this little part of our conference, is hosting some workshops about providing a time for conversation about racism and how it may impact us more than we realize. And that's the one I went to a week ago Saturday, and there's another one coming up. So if you're interested, you can go, and if you go to the next one, you will already know how to do the first exercise. Never say I don't look out for you. Now, I was I was surprised that I couldn't draw the full face on my little picture. You know, I have a slight advantage because I grew up in Alaska, but even so, I couldn't get all the features of the face onto my paper with these questions. And in fact, none of us sitting at my table, there were 4 of us, none of us could. One person at the table got kind of mad and argued that the questions were bad. And I understood the impulse. But I also understood that the purpose of this exercise is not to make us mad. It's not even to make us feel bad, because this is about our childhoods, right? We don't really have much control about our childhoods. It's not to make us feel bad about our childhoods. It's designed to help us open up our eyes and see how our childhood may be impacted the way we do things now in our lives. It may help us to realize that we had childhoods that were far more limiting when it comes to race than we ever stopped to think about. Maybe we never got to spend much time with people from other racial and ethnic groups, and maybe that's really a shame. I think we've missed out on something if we're limited that way. I mean, imagine all the things we might have learned about other people and where they come from and their experiences in the world. As the song says, what if there's a bigger picture? What if I'm missing out? What if there's a greater purpose I could be living right now outside my own little world? Maybe my own little world is limiting me from something bigger that God is calling me to do. Well, I hadn't even gone to the workshop when I went off to Oregon to see my parents last month. But I downloaded a novel, and I was reading it on the plane, and as I was reading along, I almost immediately was struck by the way the author was describing people. She kept saying, Mr. Stone was a white man who blah, 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 blah. You know, and Mrs. Jones was a white woman who blah, blah, blah. And I kept thinking, why does she keep saying that? That's odd. And finally, after about the 5th description like that, a little bell went off in my head maybe, and I looked at the back cover and I looked at the author, and she has dark skin. I think she sees the world differently than I do. If you're white like me, I'm guessing you rarely think about the color of your skin or what race we are. Probably almost never, except when you got to fill out one of those forms, that asks you to check off which race you are. And we've known ever since the Civil Rights Movement, maybe even before, that discrimination and racism is bad. It's unacceptable. And that makes us very uneasy, if you're like me, because we get visions of Archie Bunker in our heads. And I don't want to be like that man, right? Somehow along the way, we've come to this point, if you're like me, where we know racism is bad. And if you are racist, you are ignorant, bigoted, prejudiced, mean-spirited. Some people might say if you're Southern, you immediately must be racist, which isn't fair, right? But somehow this sort of floats around in our heads. If you're not racist, then you are a good person. You're probably educated, progressive, open-minded, well-intended, maybe a Northerner. This might be floating around our head. It's not true, but we have it in our heads. And so because we don't want to be bad, we want to be good, we tend to say things like, I don't see color. I don't judge a book by its cover. I was taught to treat everyone the same. I see people as individuals. Everyone struggles, but if you work really, really hard, or my parents were not racist, so I'm not, or on the flip side, my parents were racist, so I'm not. Or he or she just happened to be black in that situation. Because we get into this very uncomfortable place if we have white skin. We're trying to say here that racism is something that people do on purpose. And only a bad person would be racist, and I don't want to be a bad person, right? Get really defensive. And if we're sort of in this little circle, again, I'm not saying it's our fault, it's just the way we grew up. If we're in this little circle, it really limits us. And we look around and we just sort of feel bewildered by some of the things we see on the news. Now, I'm told that it's not that things are way worse now than they used to be, it's just that racist things are happening and being revealed more readily these days with cell phone cameras and maybe the news and the reporters. But for us, we kind of look around and we think, how can this be happening in this day and age? Isn't the civil rights movement beyond us? The whole Black Lives Matter movement, I think, is what prompted our bishop to bring this up for us. Doesn't mean that only Black lives matter, of course, because all lives matter. We know that, we say that. But historically, if we're honest and we look carefully, historically we know white lives have been valued over black ones. In fact, black lives have not mattered at all historically and even today. We know in our early American history that slavery was a reality in this country. We know that during the civil rights movement that there were lynchings. I'm told that in 2015, unarmed black people were killed by police at 5 times the rate of unarmed white people. We get bewildered because we just don't think about how we have race ourselves, that we are white. We get bewildered. A dear friend of mine, who's an American Baptist pastor, wrote a while ago that he remembered talking with one of his black dorm neighbors at his college about what it was like to be black and to drive in the city of Philadelphia or the suburbs at night. His friend was subject to search for no reason and likely to be shot if he moved too fast or took his hands off the wheel, even if asked for license and registration. My friend said, I was shocked. But he knows now, for a fact from extensive conversations with numerous friends in the intervening years, that the same reality for my black neighbors, parishioners, family members, colleagues in ministry, and friends persisted and remains true pretty much everywhere in the United States. He said it isn't just about the killing. It's the intimidation and culture of fear that are real too. Shocking. And then we have Jesus. Jesus who looked everyone in the eye, who invited everyone to the wedding banquet. Jesus who reached out to everyone, including people who didn't have power. He reached out to servants, to women, to people with disabilities, to children, to Samaritans, a whole ethnic group of people that most people in his day avoided like the plague. And you and I, we are called to follow in Jesus' footsteps and to use our power. We do have power, to use our power to do something good. As we heard earlier, if a brother or sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, "Go in peace, keep warm and eat your fill," and yet you do not supply their bodily needs, what is the good of that? So faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. Well, here's some good news. We've got Jesus who models for us the way to live our lives, to look at those scripture passages and to see the way he reached to people who were different, who had no power, oftentimes. So we have Jesus as a role model. We also have white men as a role model. If it weren't for the white men back in the early 1900s, we women would never have gotten the vote. And so, in these days and weeks and months and years ahead, I invite us all to think about how we grew up and how we want to live our lives, and encourage us all to live more like Jesus. The first step for those of us who are white may be to realize that we need to look at ourselves first and think about the things that we have maybe unconsciously even picked up in our lives. Most racism is unconscious. We may be doing racist things and not even realizing it. And I certainly hope that when I slip up, one of my brothers or sisters will set me straight, because I do want to be more like Jesus. So getting to know ourselves is the first step. The next step is to look at all of God's children in the eyes. Get to know each other. We tend to go quickly for what we have in common, and that's good. But we also need to learn about how we are different from each other, because that's where the opportunity comes to learn, to widen our view of the world, to see it how other people see it. If we can learn and listen about their experiences in the world, then our experiences and our world also enlarges, and our circle will become wider. May God give us the encouragement and the courage we need to widen our circles. Amen.